in 20 here at the end of 17th Street. Let me adjust that just a little bit. This is my weekly book reading from the beach. Before we get started though, let's have a little bit of coffee. It's a bit chilly this morning, the day after Thanksgiving here in the United States. And I think it's going to get chillier going into the coming week. So the sun came up just a while ago. Big waves out there today. Huge indeed. Some well overhead sets, and there's a couple of surfers out there already. Let's get a little coffee going here, and then we'll get started. Okay, this morning I'm going to read from my book, Going Alone, and I'm going to read the chapter titled The Cast, which actually was a chapter added at the recommendation of a friend who had read Going Alone, one of the earlier editions, and her name is Cindy. Cindy had commented that the book needed like a glossary because there's various characters in the book and places, and that it's a little bit hard to keep track of all of them and remember what they are. Like, for example, when I'm referring to the Desert Killer or the Muse or the Ghosts of Siberia or whatever, or Siberia Bridge. Each of these characters or places has lots of meaning and ideas surrounding it. And if they and she suggested that I create a glossary, and that glossary might go at the end of the book. What I decided to do though was to create a separate chapter, and I put it just after the introduction. So the introduction, which I read last week, describes the purpose of the book, and then the cast describes what characters will be encountered within the book. So let's go get started. I need a little more fortifying coffee to keep me warm. Okay, so Going Alone, chapter 2, although I call them sections, the cast. And it opens with a picture. You can see there, this is a picture written by my daughter, or drawn by my daughter, Emily. That's the Siberia, that's at the entrance to the area of Siberia ghost town off of Route 66 between between Amboy and Ludlow. About midway between those two areas, those two towns, cities, ghost towns, whatever you want to call them. There's a few people living in both of those places. Anyway, there's a big tire at the side of the road there that says West Siberia on it, and Emily drew that. And she characteristically puts in a crow in all of the videos as well, in all of her images as well, which is there aren't too many birds out there, but there are a few. Okay, beginning. There we go. The cast. Characters. Let's do it properly. Start. The cast. Characters, places, and concepts within my book. And a quote. What an immeasurable, limitless desert this is. What could you deduce here of God's purpose? What, in this dead emptiness, is He permitting? In this blank terrain, inimical to life, all-consuming, all-consumed, totally burned up and out, totally supportive of humanity's self-belief. I love that part, totally unsupportive of humanity's self-belief. That really describes it well. This fragment or segment of a world self that is not, this corpse which never since the earth was born has given its creator a single word in return. I really like that particular quote. It really describes well the consequence of going to Siberia ghost town, and that one line there, right? Totally unsupportive of humanity's self-belief. It's hard to buoy any feelings of significance or importance when you're in a place like Siberia, especially when you go further out into the desert, out into the Bristol Mountains. A moonscape that's out there. Where I'll be next week. today, in fact, next week, exactly 1 week from today, my nephew Parker and I are going out to Siberia. Here we go. Let us begin with an introduction to the places and characters which play a role in my story of going alone. Some of these will figure notably in the book, while others are only mentioned briefly or not at all, or may only appear elsewhere, such as in my other writings or within the many videos I have made and shared about the deep wilderness settings, which I have explored in Japan and America. Each of these places and characters are important to me for their use as landmarks, symbols, or analogy to the ideas I wish to convey. And as we proceed through this book, I would like you to imagine 4 separate regions where these places and characters exist as elements of the story I want to tell. So now I'm going to introduce those 4 regions. They become successively further away from us. The first region is this civilization we enjoy and share, even if you and I are separated now by vast space and time, and which is the common bond between my writing these words and your reading of them. I do not think I need to speak much of this civil place and circumstance between us, given the fact that it is our common human heritage, even if I am from California and you are from Istanbul. This shared resource of human connection is something we both know, enjoy, and may sometimes struggle to find and maintain a place within. It is our civilization and our community and our people and our home. This is the place from which we will start. It is the setting out point for this adventure of going alone. Do not lose sight of it. Never forget what it is or how important this grounding will always be to the well-lived life, to the social life, to the good life. So that's the first area, right? This where I am right now, this civilization, this common area that I share with others, that we share with others. That's our grounding point. It's the place from which so many of us can spend our entire lives, never venturing further afield, at risk of discovering what is not beyond. So that was region 1. The next 3 regions of potential exploration are settings increasingly removed from civilization, places elsewhere and far away, distant and remote to our common understanding and the comfort of what we know is true. You and I are both aliens of a sort in these less explored places, especially when we go alone, and especially when we go alone where there are no roads, trails, paths, or opportunity of help, or where the connections, security, and comfort we've left behind are now truly out of reach. At the near edge of this vast and mostly universal wild, there's a crossing over point and borderland which I call the edge of deep water. It is a high point between civilization and the deeper wilds, a place where we can at once see, hear, and otherwise perceive both the last vestige of our home and community in the near distance behind us, as well as the empty lands of wildness dead ahead and down below. This edge of deep water is some place we can indeed visit, and if we are lucky and if we go alone, then just maybe we will catch a glimpse there of the terrible thing I call the great indifference, which is defined further in this book. I recommend going no further than this edge if you are timid or scared or not willing to risk or to lose or to die seemingly too soon. This is my very real and sincere warning to you. I am not trying to seem dramatic or to simply entertain you with dangerous-sounding cautions. Death and something possibly much worse can really find you when you perceive the great indifference. Do not go alone to the edge of deep water if you do not really want to know. And if you do go, then go alone. And do not try to follow me. You will not try to follow me. You will not find what is not there if you do. So beyond that first region, which is our common safe and sane, that there's that borderland, that in-between area between the first region and then the deeper wilds. I call that the edge of deep water, and I imagine the next layer we're going into is the deep water. And the edge of deep water typically is going to be a place where we can at once see, at the same time, looking forward and back, the place when we came from if we look behind us, and then the place where we might be headed if we have the courage and are willing and able to go forward. It's a last chance, basically. It's from here, beyond the edge of deep water, that things get real. Next, and beyond the edge of deep water, comes the deep water wilderness itself. This is where most of the remaining characters and places in this book are found. They are landmarks, as I said, and though they are indeed real, it does not really matter if you find them. In fact, you are better off discovering such things in a desert, in quotation marks, of your own seeking. Go somewhere else. Find something else. Take your own scary risks. Do not seek the places and things which I have found and have related here. Do not look for the great indifference just where I found it, as it will be hard to see with the echo of my past passage blinding your view and confounding your footsteps. And if you do go where I once went, and then successfully locate any of my landmarks, such as the Watcher, or the Miner, or Campo No. 1, or the Home of Faith, or even Mount Wildness itself, then I bet you'll stand there and say to yourself, why the hell did I come here? And what was Kurt talking about? This is nothing. And so it'll be nothing to you. That is because even if you went to my places all by yourself, you did not truly go alone. So you really need to go. So we have the first region, the safe and sane, the civilization, the in-between zone, the edge of deep water, and then the deep water wilderness itself. And that's where nearly all the remaining characters all described in this chapter are from or reside. Now, none of these necessarily they're more figures and more concepts than places. So a lot of them you can transfer to any place at all. The thing is, once you're beyond, things take on a whole different tone. So let's describe that last place, the place beyond the deep water wilderness. The last place on my indistinct map of regions is the great indifference itself, which is both beyond and within the deep water wilderness. It is everywhere, in fact, only we can see it better the further we get out there in the desert. It is, in quotation marks, desert. It's in the mountains, too, and in the sea, and where you work and where you live, though you can't very well perceive such empty in these places due to the clutter of life and the artifacts of living. To perceive the great indifference clearly, you will need a desert, and you will need to go far, far beyond your own edge of deep water. Give one last look back before you proceed, going down and into your own deep water wilderness, deep water, and then beyond. Do you see it out there? If so, then now what? Read on to learn how I answered this peculiar question in my own life, which is the substance and subject of my book and story. So now that's kind of the preamble to this chapter. I heard a big crashing wave. Those are some big waves. This is the preamble section to this chapter, so let's get into the proper section now. Start describing the actual characters of Going Alone. Siberia Ghost Town. And a quote. Alas, how is it with you, that you do bend your eye on vacancy, and with the incorporeal air do hold discourse? William Shakespeare from Hamlet. Siberia is a small, deserted community halfway up the Mojave Grade between Amboy and Ludlow in the Southern California desert. There is nothing at Siberia now but ruins and ghosts, and even these have only enough remembrance to barely exist as rubble, dust, and fiction. Come here when you are ready to go further, but do not expect to find what you are looking for. It is not here. True, there were once people, lives, and dreams at this place, lives and dreams like yours and mine, though there is nothing more now to see at Siberia, though there's perhaps much yet to discover and learn, but only if you go alone, and only if you find your own Siberia. So each of these areas has a little heading, right? So I just talked about Siberia, Ghost Town, and now we go on to the next one over here, which is up here. BNSF Railroad, and then the next one down here. BNSF Railroad. Siberia Ghost Town owes its existence and history to the Burlington Northern and Santa Fe Railroad, the tracks of which run just north of the crumbled stone ruins of the ghost town's former train station, while nearby Route 66 has all but died. The BNSF remains a thriving concern, with mile-long freight trains passing east and west several times every hour, day and night, breaking the desert silence with thunderous locomotives heading up a long string of heavy freight cars moving slowly through the desert. The locomotives proceed always on their way through every desert town and siding, even the ghost towns, by issuing 4 blasts of the lead engine's deep, resonant train horn. 2 long blasts followed by a short blast, and then a last long bellow as the train approaches and then passes through the lonely Siberia Railway crossing. These trains are an irregular timepiece and reminder of what we have left behind in coming here. They pass us by very closely, yet remain impossibly far, especially at night, especially when there is no moon and the wind blows, and we wake up and we ask ourselves why we've come at all to such a place and why we came alone. Can't quite convey what it's like, that desolation, that quiet, that peace, that tranquility of sorts that can be experienced at Siberia Ghost Town at night after the train has passed. Route 66. Route 66, aka the Mother Road, is now a lonesome stretch of highway running alongside the BNSF Railroad through much of the East Mojave Desert. This old highway is my access to Siberia Ghost Town, with the infrequent traffic along this road being but an echo of the millions of people who arrived in California via this famous and historic transcontinental thoroughfare. There is a marker facing east at the north side of Route 66, where a small dirt road leads off along the short drive up to Siberia. The marker is a large tire with the words West Siberia written on it in white spray paint. I sometimes wonder how many westbound travelers on Route 66 even notice the marker. Sometimes I will stand a short way off in the desert near the tire to watch folks' faces as they drive past the ghost town entrance. The only people who ever seem to notice the sign, or me, standing alone in the empty desert, are the employees of the BNSF Railroad, passing by in their large white utility trucks. They notice me as I am out of place in a landscape they know. The others never see me. They do not know this place, as they are perhaps too focused on their Route 66 journey, which is simply yet another unworthy distraction. Siberia Bridge. This is the place where my muse lives, and where she followed me to before I at last caught up. We have conspired a lot down here, the two of us, as if we are truly just one. Such an idea. The bridge was our shelter and a catalyst to thought away from the reality masking the quite stark and terrible truth it took me 50 years to find. I have some personal things stashed down here in the rafters under the bridge. A chair, a camera, tripod, and some chalk. You are welcome to these things if you find them, as they are a bother and clutter to the simplicity that I first found here under this old road. The underside of this bridge can be a scary place to go when you are alone, especially at night. I would not want to go there if I was not already me. If you do go, well, you know, go alone. Let's have another sip. Okay, now we move on to the next item to be talked about, the Path of Wildness. The Path of Wildness is not just a character in the book, it's also one of the principles of the Good Life Creed. The Path of Wildness. The Path of Wildness is both a place in fiction and something real. I first developed this concept while living in Japan and while exploring a wilderness landscape too civil and tame to reveal the deeper truth I would later come to know in the wilder places of the American desert. The Path of Wildness is symbolic of our courage in moving forward along the riskier courses of life, where such direction seems the way our intuition suggests we should go. It takes great courage to step upon the path, which is a way untraveled, uncertain, and unforgiving. Yet the rewards are sometimes, though not always, worth the risk. Maybe I would say always. Especially to those, I think I've changed my mind since I wrote those words. Especially to those who no longer seek to the gain. That's the point, right? It is a worthwhile risk if you're no longer after the benefits, as paradoxical as that sounds. But of course, we can go this way only when we muster the courage to move forward alone, as there is no path of wildness to be found while in the company of others. Do not go if you are very scared. Please consider this my warning, as what you might surely lose along the way may not be worth the journey. That is your loss. That's something that I've struggled with over the years as people have contacted me asking about their own adventures, and I've encouraged them to go forward, and I never want them to think that it necessarily means there's going to be a positive end. In fact, it's the bad stuff that tends to be the most positive in the end. It's the wearing away of what we are. It's the becoming smaller. It's the breaking off of the bits we don't need. The whittling down from youth of the great granitic structure that we are into a small pebble, ultimately, if you're lucky, sand, and then in the end, just before death, nothing at all. Oh, to be so fortunate to be worn to nothing, like the sand, right? Each of us. If I can only be so fortunate. Throughout this book, I refer sometimes to paths, trails, ways, and sometimes roads. I use these words carefully and deliberately. I use them to describe passage through life which is safe or sane or familiar or perhaps alien and strange and remote. Trails, ways, and roads are places where we follow others and where we are not likely to encounter anything which our species has not already met. Such places are seemingly tame and civilized and somehow sanctioned by virtue of the past passage of others, even if that passage was long ago and forgotten. Even the slightest hint, this is the important part, even the slightest hint of another of our kind will spoil the way. It's not worth it if that's what you're after. If you're looking to get on the path of wildness, no, that's not true. You can get on the path of wildness and go where other people have gone, but you can't encounter the great indifference doing that. You have to go utterly on your own for that, into places where seemingly no one's been. So even the slightest hint of another of our kind will spoil the way, but only if you do not want to find what might otherwise be there. When we step off any road, trail, or way and begin moving, preferably walking, alone, then we disembark from the comfort and reassurance of precedent. We leave behind our guides. We forget to follow. We begin to move on the path of wildness. After returning to America in 2014, I discovered that the path of wildness, in fact, exists as a short, stone-lined walkway in the empty desert surrounding the deserted ghost town of Siberia. You can go there and walk the path now, leading from nowhere to nowhere. It's true. Only do not expect the journey to end where you want, or where the path peters out, or anywhere in particular at all. And for best results, go alone, of course. I need a little more coffee. I think I just dumped sand into my coffee just a minute ago. That's okay. I'm getting used to, with this new life, sand in everything, and sand everywhere. And my wife is too. How are the waves doing? Speaking of sand, the next one is the Sandman's bed. The Sandman's bed. This is a place I discovered during the anxiety hike, and which is described in the chapter of the same name in this book. The Sandman's Bed is an area of rough badlands made of decomposing granite, furrowed by a maze of flash flood channels, carved into the granite through eons of weathering and erosion. The area is immense, and often without wind, with very still and silent air. I cannot emphasize or describe to you just how still and silent that air is. And an almost unsettling quietude. The sand within the twisting, bone-dry stream beds here is soft and easy to walk on, and while the loose and weathered granite surrounding these dry water courses is solid, it is nevertheless slippery like marbles and slick like glass, and thus potentially quite dangerous to cross. Maybe one of the most dangerous places I've ever hiked in the desert, because you really could easily slip and twist an ankle, which sounds minor, but when you're 3-4 miles out in a trackless wilderness with no one around, it's actually a pretty dangerous thing to be, especially if you have no means of rescue. Also, that area, that Sandman's Bed, is well beyond any signal on a cell phone. You'd need an emergency beacon or a satellite phone to rescue yourself for that. This is a place where you are likely to trip and fall, or twist an ankle, or pull a tendon and become unable to walk. This is also a good place to come to meet and get to know the side of yourself which maybe didn't expect a universe without intrinsic meaning, or that didn't know that you could be so lonesome with the idea of a universe chock full of empty. Do you think you can weather the silence here? Can you maintain your equanimity in the face of such unsettling peace and quiet? Dare you, and this is the important part for me, dare you take off your shoes when you are so far alone in the Sandman's maze? It's really scary to do that, to take off your shoes out there, because you feel, I felt when I did it, vulnerable. To then lie upon the sand and close your eyes and see just how long you can keep your eyes shut. Come here other than alone, and you might as well have never come at all. And I'll confess to you here, which is that as I make this, that I didn't just take off my shoes, I took off everything. I piled all my clothes in a neat little pile on the side, and I just lay there naked upon the sand out there, miles into a wilderness, exposed to the empty and nothing, because I wanted to feel the vulnerability of being utterly exposed. It's good to lay yourself raw and exposed and naked in the fearful wild. It's humbling. Mount Wildness, that's next. Mount Wildness is my perennial destination, and a place where I have never been. I still haven't been there. And will never, ever arrive. For a while there I thought I might get there, but now I know I won't. Although we'll see. At least you'll never hear that from me. I made up Mount Wildness while living in Japan. So it's a place, it's a fictional place, a mountain that I invented in Japan that I brought over with me to America. Imagine bringing a mountain with you to another continent. I made up Mount Wildness while living in Japan, imagining this mountain as the home of the true things I feared most, and a destination I could strive for in my better moments. I imagined Mount Wildness as having two sides, the near and the far side. Now, I really did picture this when I was in Japan, the near and the far side of Mount Wildness, and what was out there on the far side, which was pretty scary to imagine. With the near side being the place I could actually approach in relative safety, while the far side is an impossible distance I might indeed someday reach, but from which then I might then never fully return. Mount Wildness became a very real place to me after I came home to America and identified a very remote mountain in the eastern Mojave Desert as this likely peak. I later concluded I was wrong and have since identified a new and much more distant peak, further and more terrible, as the real Mount Wildness. Quotation marks over real. It is my goal to hike to this mountain before my life is done. Good luck. I'm probably not going to do it. But especially since I gave away all my hiking equipment. But I'll never tell anyone what I find there. Going to Mount Wildness may be the last thing I ever do. Now I wonder what will happen when I get back to Japan, if I'll continue with this Mount Wildness concept and if I'll identify a new one there. A lot of my writing that I did in Japan revolved around that, especially there's bits in here, a lot of it has been transferred into this in the little messages from the Muse section, which are peppered this book all throughout. There's a channel that I have, a lesser known YouTube channel called Gurd Speak, G-U-R-D, Speak, Gurd Speak, one word, where I talk a lot about, on the Gurd Speak channel, there are videos, they're kind of spooky audio, voiceover videos, where I kind of play with the idea of venturing between the near and the far side of Mount Wildness and being chased. There's one on there called being chased near the foot of Mount Wildness or something. It's pretty spooky stuff. I'd like to make more of those. I made that during a particular period. I made most of those videos, those audios actually, coming back from deep adventures in Japan, and I would be walking back down the trail, and I would be creating those little audio things from, filled with the emotions and the thoughts that were in my mind from having just had an adventure in the mountains in Japan. So that's kind of that's a big part of this story, the Mount Wildness, although it's interesting because it was both in Japan and here. Mount Wildness existed in both, and I wonder if I'll take it back to Japan again. Okay, the next one is called The Woodsman's Cabin in Campo Number 1, which is a real place, in fact. The Woodsman's Cabin is another place which I dreamed up in Japan. The idea probably began as a result of the many abandoned farms, and in particular the forgotten and dilapidated old farm sheds, chock full of old farming tools, which I found while exploring in the deep mountains of central Japan. There was something about these deserted places which suggested past care and concern by humans, and the subsequent loss of any consideration or remembrance even. There is an emptiness about such places which in some ways is deeper and more telling than the mere nothing we can sometimes, and sometimes only, sense while alone in very wild places. This is the atmosphere and character of the Woodsman's Cabin, a token of the wonderful warmth and love of what was, discovered in contrast to, and within the cold embrace of, the emptiness which will forever be. So that's the Woodsman Cabin. Every now and then when I was in Japan, I'd be hiking out in the mountains and I'd come across an abandoned farm, and there'd be an old farm shed in there. And you'd take a close look and there'd be farm tools inside. And I know the story, I know exactly what happened. One day, a farmer, after spending his entire lifetime, sometimes building that farm hewing it out of the mountain itself, his farming career came to an end. He never came back. There's a dramatic set of videos where I made of the green tea farmer in the mountain who I met, who invited me to hike up into his farm in the mountains that he had hewn 50 years prior out of the top of a mountain to create a tea farm. And his wife showed up later. There's no road up there. It's just a trail up to the top. And his wife showed up later with lunch. And the three of us sat up there and had a great time. And I went back like 3 years later, and it was all deserted and gone. I couldn't even barely find it. The trail was all over, all grown over. And I got up there, and so I'd seen firsthand what it was like to have the life, the love, and then gone. And then the farm shed there, and his farm shed was collapsed at the time. But I would often find farm sheds chock full of tools. And I came up with this idea that on Mount Wildness, on the far side, around the corner, remember, the far side is the dangerous side. There's a howling on the far side of Mount Wildness. There's something there that howls. It speaks to the wild, to the deep wild, and the emptiness and the indifference of the universe. And there, that farm shed was be full of tools. And I imagined the Woodsman's Cabin. I called it the Woodsman's Cabin. And I came up with this idea in Japan. And again, on that Gerd Speak channel, there's a couple about the Woodsman's Cabin as well. And I brought that over here. Imagine my surprise then when I was out at Siberia hiking in the Bristol Mountains, and I discovered Campo Number 1, which I'll talk about in just a second, which was the Japan Woodsman's Cabin incarnate in the United States. There was something about these deserted places which suggested past care and concern by humans, and the subsequent loss of any consideration or remembrance even. There's an emptiness about such places which in some ways is deeper and more telling than the mere nothing we can sometimes, and sometimes only sense while alone in very wild places. This is the atmosphere and character of the woodsman's cabin, a token of the wonderful warmth and love of what was, discovered in contrast to, and within the cold embrace of, the emptiness which will forever be. That's the first hint there, the solid hint of the great indifference, the emptiness which will forever be, the emptiness of the universe, a universe without God. Campo number 1 is a very real place and the remnant of a former, so now I'm switching from the Japan woodsman's cabin to bringing that woodsman's cabin home to the United States, to Campo number 1. Here, I'll describe that. Campo number 1 is a very real place and the remnant of a former desert mining site located at the edge of the deep water wilderness. It and the woodsman's cabin are central to the story of Going Alone, as these real places are the last real frontiers of connection in my own adventure before entering a place I call the Valley of the Soulless Beasts, which is too distant a place to visit in this book. I sometimes use this lost camp to overnight at when exploring in the deeper desert. It is a good place to rest and sleep and remember what we are now and what we soon must not become. So the woodsman's Campo number 1 is a real deserted mining town, not a town, not by any means. It's more of a camp, a place where people could sleep, where miners would sleep, probably in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, maybe as late as the 1930s. And there's a structure, a small little structure, a little frame, not much bigger than a bathroom. And there's a stove thingy and a chair and a desk. And it's really out there, and it's out there right now, and I'm sure it's practically unchanged. Nothing seems to change out there in the deep desert. So I transferred the woodsman cabin to it. Now the position of Campo number 1 is perfect because it's just beyond the edge of deep water. It's down into it a little bit. So you're just into, and if you use that analogy of the far side of Mount Wildness, it's kind of on the entrance of the far side of the Mount Wildness. In fact, I could not have described it more perfectly as in the picture in Japan, long before I came to America, long before that, the picture I had of Mount Wildness as being this formidable dark mountain deep in the mountains in the Japan Southern Alps, where on the near side you could approach that. This was forecasting the concept of the great indifference and the edge of deep water. That's the edge of deep water, and then beyond the other side is the deep water wilderness. That's where the great indifference can be found. That's where the howling is, and that's where the woodsman cabin is. And then I brought it all home here in America and created the same thing in the desert. Interesting how life repeats itself in a way, right? Or maybe art can be said to do so. Okay, the next section is the deep water wilderness. So let's get into the place itself. And here's a quote. But what must be the solicitude of him who should be wandering among the cracks and hollows, benighted, ignorant, and alone? That's a quote from Dr. Johnson. Now let me refresh my coffee as I describe that. That was a quote that Dr. Johnson was not a man to go to the wilderness by any means at all. Johnson was a man who said, he spent his life in London. He once said, the man who tires of London is the man who's tired of life, who has enough of life. But he did go with James Boswell in the middle of the 17th century together, around 1640, 1650. I think it was 1652 actually, out into the Scottish Highlands and out into the Hebrides. And this particular quote that he made was when he was resting on his little mule, which can you imagine the size of the ginormous Dr. Johnson, the huge heaping man that he was, riding a small little pony. And the company had stopped at a little place where there was like a little hollow in the stream, and there was a little waterfall, a rivulet, and Dr. Johnson, not a man familiar with wilderness by any means, and he penned this little line. He said, and I'll quote it, I'll read it again, as he sat there on the ground looking at this little wilderness in Scotland, he said, but what must be the solicitude of him who should be wandering among the cracks and hollowed, benighted, ignorant, and alone. Dr. Johnson, thank you for forecasting 250 years later what people like me and people throughout history have been doing when we go to these places alone. When I encountered this quote when I was reading the journal of his the Diary of the Hebrides, I was like, oh my gosh, even Dr. Johnson sees it. It's not just me, and I've encountered it in my reading over and over again, instances of the great indifference being spotted by adventurers, authors, poets, etc. It's not just me. It's a real not real thing. Because the irony is the great indifference isn't real, right? God isn't real. It's a great emptiness of the universe, and it's a recognition of that emptiness. It's a recognition that we're alone that is the eye opener. So it's like perceiving a vacuum, right? And then the thing that happens is, what do you do with that? Especially when you realize all the consequences that come with that the idea that vacuum is any universal sentience that might be watching over us, and that we don't have that, and it's just up to us to look after ourselves and one another. All we've got is each other, right? Okay, carry on. Sorry, I got kind of on a ramble there. We're still on the Deepwater Wilderness. We just haven't even started it. It was just Dr. Johnson's quote. One more time. But what must be the solicitude of him who should be wandering among the cracks and hollows, benighted, ignorant, and alone? Thank you, Dr. Johnson. This is a real place, though the name is one I came up with myself. Honestly, I do not know what this place might be properly called, as it seems at once too unremarkable and uninteresting a landscape to be worthy of a name all its own. But I gave it a name nonetheless. You can get to the Deepwater Wilderness, but you won't be able to get there if you follow my instructions. It won't work. You can go there, you can follow my instructions and go there, but good luck. You got to find your own. You can get to the Deepwater Wilderness by first going to Siberia Ghost Town. Just plug the ghost town's name into your device's map application. It'll show up. You just plug it into Google Maps or Waze and do Siberia, California, and you'll find it. After you arrive, start walking towards those low hills to the north. When you get there, then get ready, for what is beyond those hills is harder than it looks. That beyond, in quotation marks, is the Deepwater Wilderness. Are you ready for a swim beyond your depths? Just how long can you tread and keep your head above water? This is the landscape where the desert killers live. The killer here is there. The killer is there when you expect it should be, but also perhaps when you might not. The only real sanctuary here is the home of faith, which I have defined and described a little further in this book. But even faith cannot keep you alive or intact if you are too trusting, bold, or foolish. The Deepwater Wilderness is someplace you should never bring any such nonsense. You have been warned. So you can go there if you want. You can type Siberia into your Waze or your Google Maps or whatever you do, and you can get there and you can park your car, and you can climb over the railroad tracks and head off the mile hike up into the edge of deep water and get up to the top and look over and down. And if you go down into that colorful valley down below, you will have entered deep water, but not really, because you're following my footsteps, and that'll ruin everything. You might even find the home of faith, which is a cave going due straight north. If you go right off the top, go to the very top of that bank I talked about at the edge of the Bristol Mountains, and go straight down, and you might find the cave. Just keep an eye out for it up there. You'll also find some of the other characters listed here, but good luck. You won't find the great indifference because you followed mine. I'm beating that dead horse, but I just can't emphasize it enough. You have to find your own Siberia. You have to go on your own path of wildness. You have to spill the coffee all over yourself with sand in it nonetheless. Carry on. Okay, now, the next one is the edge of deep water. This is where you can fairly safely go from Siberia if you simply want to glimpse the empty without much risk of the empty glimpsing you. Not really. The empty is not going to glimpse you, but it made a good sentence, right? Never go here during summer. No. You'll die for sure. If you get as far as I just described in August, what I just described, if you go where I just described in August, you won't go back. You won't make it back. You'll be dead before you make it to the car. Never go here during summer, though, as you will really not make it back. You won't make it back. You will die. However, during almost any other time of the year, just go to Siberia Ghost Town and then walk north for a mile. I'm kind of describing what I just described, but it's because I need to get you back there and then back over further again. Or so until you reach those low hills. Carefully climb the hills, and when you reach the top, then look north out over the edge. If you go to the highest point of those low hills, then you can stand in my own footsteps for whatever that might be worth. Nothing. You'll ruin it all. I promise you will. I ruin it for myself if I go back to the same place. I wonder if you'll also feel my fear here while you stand there. Look north. It's windy up there. It's kind of spooky. Look north and down now from where you are. That place down below is where the last part of the anxiety hike took place. You are standing now at the very final point in the anxiety hike chapter of this book, at the place where I point out that you can see Siberia once more. You can finally see safety again. You are out. You have made it. So there's another chapter further on called the anxiety hike, and this is where the end of that hike, it's the key hike of the book, and that's where that end finishes up, right there. So it's kind of like making the circuit back. There is a watcher, in quotation marks, down there, described below in parentheses, in that twisting canyon just below you, watching even now, even 100 years after I write these words, down and a little to the east, which would be to the right when you get down. Can you find it? I have left something there for you in case you try. Though the watcher is watching always, it will never see you, as there is too much empty blocking the view. If you are lucky, then this same empty will soon become apparent to your own view. This is the great indifference, which begins here. Those black mountains dead ahead, yet very far in the distance, that is a place to go. But remember always the desert killer, which can easily find you from this point on. There is a sanctuary here called the Home of Faith. Can you find it? I never did. So, subtle play of words there, right? I mean, of course, I found the Home of Faith cave. That's why I gave it a name, right? But the idea is that the Home of Faith, the idea is, I think in my worldview, faith is a sin because it's basing belief on the want of belief. The belief itself being the foundation for the thing that we want to believe, which is like retreating into a dark cave further back into the gloom so that we don't have to deal with the sunlight and glare of looking at something square and true, right? So if we just kind of dig ourselves deeper back in, then we don't have to see, and we sequester ourselves away in the quiet and the silence. That's why when I was in that cave, when I discovered that cave in the desert, and I climbed up to it and I went out deep into it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just like us. When we want to believe something and we don't have a good reason to believe, and we just say, I just believe it on faith, I'm turning from the light, going deeper into the darkness. And then I pictured others that believed the same thing, for the same reason, huddled there in the darkness, back in the back of the cave. That's why I call that cave the Home of Faith. And so that is, the Home of Faith is back there. So if you go up to that top, down into the canyon, the Watcher, which is a pile of, should I tell you what it is? Yeah, well, the hell, it's a pile of stones, that a cairn that a miner put there maybe 150 years ago, and it's up to there to the right. Then if you go further up, you'll find the Home of Faith, and there's another cave to the left that someone dug out of the side of the riverbank. If you find that cave, that's not the Home of Faith. That's something else that doesn't have a name. Wait, did I get there? Yeah. Can you find it? I have left something there for you. Blah, blah, blah. If you are lucky, then the same... Okay. If you are lucky, I might be reading again. If you are lucky, then this same empty will soon become apparent here. Those black mountains dead ahead, yet very far in the distance. Yeah, I did read this, but what the hell? That is a place to go. But remember always the desert killer, which can easily find you from this point on. There is a sanctuary here called the Home of Faith. Can you find it? I never did, because I don't have any faith. I mean, I have faith. I have faith, for example, that free will is an illusion. So, I mean, I'm guilty of faith as well. I just don't have any faith in that God exists. There's no reason for that. And I died without knowing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I'll die without faith. Just like my father before me. A very worthy death, if not without some risk. Okay, now the next one, the Muse. And I can see my wife is texting me, so she must be up. I sat down to make notes on a green bank. Oh, this is another quote. I sat down to make notes on a green bank with a small stream running at my feet, in the midst of savage solitude, with mountains before me, and on either hand covered with heath. I looked round me and wondered that I was not more affected. But the mind is not at all time equally ready to be put into motion. That's Dr. Johnson again. Now, it's Dr. Johnson mentioning, he's writing again from that exact same spot I just mentioned, the previous quote, which also was from Johnson. The interesting thing was this point, this is this section called, the little subsection called the Muse. Dr. Johnson was writing that as beautiful a spot, as in rare and special as it was for him, the Muse didn't come to him then, which I found really interesting, because the Muse usually sometimes does come in such places, especially when we're inspired. And Johnson even noted, strange, I'm in such an amazing place, but yet no Muse. Keen observation, Dr. Johnson. I first learned of the Muse through literary references, though she, in quotation marks, did not start speaking to me, or at least I did not begin to notice or hear until my early to mid-20s. At that time, her voice was more youthful and optimistic, full of new promise and hinting at the rich and varied life of potential to come. Was she fooling me then? Or perhaps was she simply as young, dumb, and innocent as I? Our work product together was then an expression, an outlet for a rich fecundity of thought, both buoyant and light. Let me try that again. Our work product together then was an expression and outlet for a rich fecundity of thought, both buoyant and light, and characterized by an animate energy that was my right at so young an age. Now my Muse is older. And so I'm describing there, when I was young, the Muse came to me as this like this youthful bubbling thing, and I would write crayons and poetry and all that stuff. And I've since thrown all that stuff away. It's all gone. So pretty much all of the work that I did, the younger stuff, kind of like Dr. Johnson did, it's all gone. I'll tell the story of how I got rid of it. It was kind of accidental. But still, the Muse came to me then more in the spirit of my youth than in the spirit of my age. So that's how I know the Muse isn't anything other than me. That's one of the ways that I know that. Now my Muse is older and seemingly more mature. Her attitude is still one of optimism, though she tempers this with an almost cold and naked inflammatory confession that she was never alive to begin with. All those years of warmth, that was simply me embracing myself in the mirror, holding my hot mortal being to myself, while pretending there were two of me, myself and my Muse. Now I know there was never the Muse, and it was always just me. And now I feel my end is coming soon, and for this reason I no longer lie. The Muse is nothing. Her impression is my own want of something more. Her inspiration, my vain expression of lasting substance and eternal life where there is none. My Muse is a corpse, my own corpse, a recognition of death before I am dead, and a decision to live while there is still some time left to be alive. Now that's interesting that I call it My Muse is a Corpse. It's another chapter within the book. Of course, that is simply the character of the Muse in my 50s. Let's see what happens in my 60s. Maybe the Muse will take a more upbeat turn again. We'll see. The next one is The Ghosts of Siberia, another quote by Dr. Johnson. The graves are very numerous, and some of them undoubtedly contain the remains of men who did not expect to be so soon forgotten. Dr. Johnson. Interesting, that one. I thought of that one, that quite apt, right? Especially given the graves in Siberia that have no name. These ghosts were suggested by the presence of graves I've discovered at and around various ghost towns in the eastern Mojave Desert. Though Siberia Ghost Town does not have a proper graveyard, there is nevertheless a few stone monuments which appear to be graves, scattered here and there in the surrounding desert. These markers suggest the memory of people who once lived here and who made this place home. These are the ghosts which haunt my thoughts whenever I come here alone, remembered, in fact, by no one. Actually, the Ghosts of Siberia didn't play a very significant part in the book, although they did play a significant part in my mind, especially as I spent time alone out there at Siberia. I would think about them at night, think about the dead people buried in the sand around me without a name or even barely anything more than a little stone marker. I would also think about the corpses that were that have been dug up by grave robbers that I've discovered out there as well. The bones, more likely. The next chapter is called The Great Indifference. Is there none out there to... Here's another quote. Is there none out there to respond? No one at all? No one in the abyss, nor under the heavens shall? Let me try that again. I didn't do a good job. Is there none out there to respond? No one at all? No one in the abyss, nor under the heavens shall? This is by Henrik Ibsen, musing, so to speak, on the emptiness of the universe. Another reference, another author, poet, reflecting on the emptiness of the universe, the apparent emptiness of the universe, which we can't see in church. You can't go to church unless maybe it's an empty church and perceive very well the absence of God. You need to actually go out into a wilderness. And not even this won't do you. Maybe way out there in the open ocean you could do it. I haven't tried, but a desert, a moonscape will do it if you go alone. This concept, the Great Indifference, is central to the entire story within this book. The Great Indifference, that was loud. Big old wave. The Great Indifference is the book's last destination, and some place from which I have conspired an escape. That's the key element right there, the escape, right? So going alone is about going there, seeing it, and then getting away safe back to the loving bosom of our family, home, and community. That's the key element. Going alone is not about going alone. It's about the punchline, as I like to say, is the coming back. Again, this concept is central to the entire story within this book. The Great Indifference is the book's last destination, and someplace from which I have conspired an escape. This is the somewhat hidden punchline of the book, of the story, that we can meet something in nature so awful as the Great Indifference and then carry on living good and meaningful lives without either denying or hiding from the fact of what we've not found, or making up stories to disperse and quiet our fears, making up ideas about God and religion and forever and peace and prayers being answered, etc., so that we can contrive a peace that we don't otherwise have the courage to build for ourselves. The idea of encountering the Great Indifference is that when we go far enough alone into nature, we may discover a type of emptiness and void which is both awesome and unsettling. It is this vista of disinterest which I call the Great Indifference. It is a recognition of no love or caring in nature beyond what we find with one another, as well as with a few select species that have evolved to become our companions and friends. Other than with these, there are none who truly care if we live or die, thrive or suffer, or if we even find peace with the wholesale recognition of just how truly alone we really are. In short, the Great Indifference is the recognition of a universe devoid of the wishful presence of a loving God or any others besides other members of our species or our pets, who might have some capacity to love and to care. The Great Indifference is a place utterly silent of evident meaning. It is also suggestive of our own capacity to create meaning by our own willful decisions and efforts, to reclaim some sense of meaning from the awful night. There's my sermon. Disclaimer. It actually is a disclaimer. There is a problem with this term, the Great Indifference, which frustrated me for a long time until I came up with this disclaimer. Still frustrates me, in that this phrasing suggests some context or character from which indifference might emerge. Namely, it suggests God. And I do not mean that. In fact, I mean the exact opposite. I perceive no God out there in the deep desert, and the arguments others make for God being real are clearly weak and contrived and poorly reasoned, constituting little more than a thin veneer of pretend, masking the necessity of faith to hold aloft ideas more vacuous of truth than fiction, more empty still for the very fact that believers accept the fantasy as true. And the irony that I created a term to describe a universe seemingly devoid of God, which then winds up backing me straight into God, it may be a deistic God, but a God nonetheless, does not escape my attention. And honestly, this fact frustrates me a bit. It is a problem of language, an issue of vocabulary. as I cannot quite find a better term or phrase to describe the universe's seeming uncaring or incapacity to care, without then also implying something with this very capacity to care. I will live with that. I just can't find a better way to describe it. The great indifference, just on the flip side of the coin, suggests caring. Something that is involved, and so the thing that is indifferent would be the agent that has the indifference. Some agent needs to have the indifference, and that's not what I mean. What I simply mean is that it's the substrate of emptiness, which is incapable of caring or having indifference. See, I struggle with it all the time, and I just can't. It's my lack of vocabulary, or maybe just through the English language, or maybe just the way our brains are formed. It's hard to come up with a better way to describe it than that. Another problem with the term the great indifference is the fact of us. We are part of the universe, and we are certainly not indifferent. In this way, the universe has indeed acquired the ability through us to become either interested. By us, I mean us means us and all life on Earth. In this way, the universe has indeed acquired even plants, acquired the ability through us to become either interested or indifferent, at least insofar as we and other sentient species on Earth like us exist, and through the possible existence elsewhere in the universe of other forms of sentient life. I would probably stretch that now to say even non-sentient life, right? I mean, a plant will withdraw from excess heat or cold or some things like that. So I mean, there's and even inanimate objects have reactions to the world. So that kind of speaks to the point that I'm trying to make. Yet it seems that the vast infinitude of the universe does mostly match my original meaning of the great indifference, insofar as this term describes what I perceive, through my quite limited sense and cognition, to be an enormous vista of emptiness and uncaring, which serves as the backdrop and context for every aspect of our lives. We avoid staring into this deep empty by way of our incessant busy living, punctuating our moments with innumerable distractions and entertainment. Hence the principle in the Good Life Creed of indifference. And in living this way, we fail to see what is not out there, not loving or caring about us. In fact, may not be capable of loving or caring about us, or even knowing that we are here. And by ignoring this great emptiness and void, we then run the risk of perhaps attributing more to the universe than might be warranted, dreaming up fantasies of significance and eternities of joy for the good and damnation for the bad, which the universe mutely implies are hardly real or even utterly false. So I will stick with my term, the great indifference, partly because I cannot think of a better phrase, but really because it's exactly what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I'll live with that. Last bit. A few times in this book, I reference a place called the Volcano Wilderness. This is a place about 30 miles west of Siberia along Route 66 and near the town of Newberry Springs. This is the very first place I spotted and almost recognized the great indifference. To get there, simply drive to the end of Gasco Road and park near the fenced gas pipeline work yard. Do not worry, nobody is likely to bother your vehicle here. Get out and begin walking south and uphill towards those low black mountains in the distance. It is a long walk, a very long walk. When you reach the mountains, then find your way up and to the left. When you arrive at the top, then look over the edge. That thing you do not see down there, that is the great indifference. And that, in fact, was the very first place I saw the great indifference and recognized it for what it is. I'd seen it a couple of times in Japan. I didn't recognize it for what it wasn't. It was there at the Volcano Wilderness, a main name I made up that I finally saw it. I realized, oh my gosh, this is the empty. This is the nothing. This is the universe without God. That was the moment when it happened, when I woke up, and I'll remember that. I'll remember that moment forever. And probably the first moment that I began to get the idea that I would put all of this together into a book was that moment. That thing you do not see down there, that is the great indifference. But do not bring anyone with you unless you are only after a difficult hike. This is also the area where I brought my daughter and where I found those human bones mentioned a few times in this book. All right, the next one is the soulless beast. beasts. In a quote from the Bible, no less. Man that is in honor and understandeth not is like the beasts that perish. Psalm 49:20. A class of animals which includes me, who wander the desert waste beyond the pale memory of what once was alive and loving at and around Siberia Ghost Town and other desert places like it. The soulless beasts are strong and full of the base energy and determination which characterizes nature in places which humans have forgot or never cared to love. The soulless beasts typically emerge at night, being most active in moonless, dark, which fact hides their living and camouflages their determination from any minds which might suspect something more to life than simply staying alive and getting our genes into the next generation. The soulless beasts display both purpose and meaning of a sort, while trotting, crawling, slithering, or flying along the path of wildness. I know what it is to move among their midst. I know when I am with them, alone, I know when I am with them alone what it is like to have no soul. I remember that I too have no soul. I came up with this idea of the soulless beast because, remember, the desert's a pretty intense place, and I would sometimes hike into the deep water wilderness at night. Arriving at the desert after work, I would drive out there, or ride my motorcycle out there, and I'd get out there like at 8 p.m. Dark had already fallen, and I'd put my pack on, leave the bike, and just hike for 3 or 4 hours into the desert. And as I was hiking, if I would do it on a moonlit night, I didn't need my flashlight, and I would detect animals in the wood, moving around, even in the winter, foxes and snakes and rodents and other things that I didn't even know what they were, rabbits, things like that. And I realized, oh wow, these are the inhabitants here, because you usually don't see those things during the day. And reminding myself that I have no soul, in order to do that, I began to call them the soulless beasts. And I remember in particular, it's described in here, the one night that thing came snuffling around my camp. The snuffling soulless beast. There's a lot of surfers out there. The desert killer. Death stalks the desert lands at all times, though most particularly during the very hot and very cold seasons, when life can be either burned out of us from within or evaporated away in the shivering cold. In either case, the killer does not care about anything we might feel or say or do or pretend while our living is slowly drawn out and away through either an excess or absence of temperature. Death, then, is nearly always present and persistent in the desert. Death never cared nor cares. The summer killer lives in the east and arrives at dawn. Now I'm going to describe the two killers, the summer killer and the winter killer. The summer killer lives in the east and arrives at dawn and stalks the wastes boldly throughout the day after mid-morning, retreating only at night and sometimes not even then. The winter killer comes from within, though its breath is the cold outside night wind, and its touch the caress of cold outer space looming with empty behind a thin veil of breathless atmospheric night. Beware these two killers, wandering the seasonal wastes. Avoid their paths. Stay clear. Your death is no matter to them. They are not real and are incapable of care regarding life or death. So that the two killers, the summer and the winter killer, will get you roughly from about April. Summer killer can get you from about April until way into October. And then the winter killer from about December through late February, early March, mid-March maybe. There's a short period of time between when you can hike into the deep water wilderness. That's the time. In fact, I'm going next week. I'm taking Parker, my nephew, out. We're going to hopefully go to the Home of Faith. He'll be the first person I've ever taken there. I have taken Emily out to the deep water wilderness. She's been to the volcano wilderness, but other than that, nobody's gone with me. So Parker will be the first in a long time. My little God. My little God is so small as to be almost non-existent. He lives with me to remind me of the things I fear and which I am tempted to invent solutions for in order to make the fear go away. My little God gets angry when I doubt or ask questions or consider other options. He wants me to follow him, though he has no real idea where to go, and would rather sit at home all day or even hide beneath the covers of my bed. I make an effort to write his name, God, in quotation marks, in lowercase letters, though if he could read, he would surely see this as my sacrilege. I do this to him as a deliberate insult to his feigned importance and contrived consequence. It is an expression of my disdain for his petty, mere, and very slight existence, an existence only within my mind, and when I think of him, and when I call his facile cheat. I always struggle to get that last line out. So my little God is my answer to the concept. So I don't have a God. I don't believe in God. And if it seems like I bring that up a lot, that's because a lot of what this book's about, right? This book is about creating a good life and not needing supernatural agencies, guidance, permission, or oversight to do so. And that doesn't mean just being able to do whatever the hell you want to do. That means building a life based on sound and objective principles in my case, aiming towards the improvement of the well-being of thinking creatures, which has nothing to do with just getting your own way. It has everything to do with living a better life that leaves the world a better place for the fact that we've been here. And I hammer home over and over the non-existence of God because that is the most readily made path that people turn to. They turn to the store-bought solutions that are offered to them, the prepackaged solutions of just offer your faith and belief and accept this particular creed and this guidance, and then you too will be fine, which might have a lot of good things in there, but for the most part it doesn't involve the hard work of doing it yourself. And I'm recommending doing it yourself, going alone, recognizing the facts of the world around us, the fact that we seem to be alone, and then turning back to our communities and our families and our loved ones and building a set of principles and objectives of our own to live by. And my little God is my little answer to that. My God is this little tiny little thing that's very fearful and weak and wishes me to subscribe to it so that I can be its accolade, and that it'll take care of me. And I guess I'm making fun of the idea in my own way, in that capacity. I have made a home for my little God there in the wilderness. It is just below the edge of deep water, below that place I previously suggested you go, to look across and over the place you should probably not go. My little God is very real. He came with me from Japan and lives now in a small hole above that sandy wash leading into deep water from the dangerous abandoned mine shaft. You have to read that chapter called the Anxiety Hike to understand what I mean by the dangerous mine shaft. Check the holes. If you find him, if you find my little God, then tell him please that he is not true, and then leave him alone there to become forgotten once more. Next is the howling, and a quote from the Bible. He found him in the desert land and in the waste howling wilderness. Deuteronomy 32:10. The howling represents the place which is further and beyond the point where I know I can venture and still hope to return home sound and intact to my family. It is not that whatever is out there making the howling can necessarily hurt me, though it certainly isn't harmless, but instead that once I reach that place, I can probably never fully return. Something of me will remain there always, or will die, or will become extinct, like a lost memory of something that once was and will never again be. So while I have no plan to discover the source of the howling during the course of my otherwise sane and sober living, I do hope that chance will allow me one last fleeting glimpse before the final light of my living is extinguished for good. I do not think I can successfully hear or locate the howling unless I am very, very alone. The Watcher. The Watcher is nothing more than a pile of stones atop a small rise adjacent to the southwest flank of the hill I call Black Mountain. The Watcher, when I first spotted it the first time, actually scared me. This name Watcher came about after I first spotted the stones of which the Watcher is made during one of my earliest hikes in the area. I'd been about a mile away at the time and could see atop the rise what appeared to be a solitary human figure standing and looking my way. This sight was quite unsettling at the time, as I was convinced I was alone there and could not imagine another human being anywhere nearby, let alone someone so clearly watching me. The figure never moved, though throughout that first day, and I soon determined it was nothing more than a pile of placed stones, probably a mining claim. Return visits to the area confirmed my suspicions. As the watcher was always there, he's probably out there now. And when I at last paid him a visit, I found the site was indeed nothing more than a long-forgotten pile of stones, marking the site where a miner had suspected some mineral riches might be found. It is interesting to know that the stones which the miner so carefully placed here remain still in their assigned positions, so long after the hand which set them has certainly turned to dust. That watcher really did unsettle me the first time I saw it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not alone, there's somebody out here. And it kind of then hammered home when I realized it was nothing, that there is nothing. Nothing other than our agency, the life, the sentient life on this planet, and even the non-sentient life, right, which is something. Maybe that'll be the thing to uncover in Japan, that the something is in fact nothing. The miner. The miner is the last, though not the final character I've so far met within the Deepwater Wilderness. You will find him sitting atop a small ridge about a quarter mile from the spot where the canyon leading up from the dangerous abandoned mine shaft begins to open and widen into a landscape of color. See the section of this book titled The Anxiety Hike, or see the map that my daughter created. My daughter made a map of this whole thing. I really haven't done anything with it yet, but an incredible map of this entire landscape, and you can see it there. I got to figure out what to do with that. Maybe make a poster out of it. That would be something else. A poster of what Emily made. I'm going to do that. I would imagine this miner might be the last. I would imagine this miner might be the last familiar figure I'd see in this life should I someday find my end out there beyond deep water in the heart of the Black Mountains, or maybe amidst the Sandman's Bed, or perhaps even out there somewhere in the distant vicinity of Mount Wildness. If you didn't read it, that's a suggestion towards suicide. Okay, not a willful suicide. Well, it would be a willful suicide. Not a suicide because of despair of life, but if my idea is that if I ever get really sick and I'm going to die, rather than linger and dwell on, I would hope I would have the courage to just go out there to the desert and take one last long hike out into the wilderness and disappear into the nothing, right? Save myself and my family the trouble of watching me go down hard and the expense of a funeral and all that stuff. So that literally what that is. That is a prognosis of suicide if life ever gets to that point, and if I still have that area within reach. If I'm in Japan and I get to that point, then I know how to do it in Japan too. And the trick is, would I have the courage to kill myself when the end is in sight and there's no reasonable means out, and all that is pain and suffering, all that remains is pain and suffering? I know there is some example in the good hard example of sticking it out to the end, but there's also a good example in just realizing when time has been enough, it's been enough, and just go out. This is not an end I want, though it is also not an end I would not want. And this is the last 2 pages. The Homunculus, and a quote by Shakespeare. Aye, but to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clot. William Shakespeare. The homunculus is nothing more than that little man or woman who lives in our heads and who peeks out at the world from behind our eyeballs. It is the small person who pulls the levers and pushes the buttons of our mind, guiding us along and steering our body and brain through every circumstance and decision. The homunculus is the one who suffers when we fail, who rejoices when we succeed, and who stands accountable for every consequence of the fact of our life. This little person, quotation marks, is trapped in our head, cannot get out, and will die when we die. The homunculus sometimes fools itself into thinking it can and will one day escape our cooling corpse. It tells itself that there is a way out, a hatch somewhere perhaps, to admit it away from the end of our mortal being. The homunculus has no idea where this hatch is, or any clue about how to undo the binding straps which hold it secure within our cranium. But never mind these facts, it will survive. We simply know this is true. though we have no idea how or why. Some homunculi, though, prefer not to be fooled. That would be me. And they look out at the world not as and there's a lot of other people like me in that capacity. And they look out at the world not as a temporary passenger prepared to embark to somewhere new, but instead as a trapped and bound mortal, counting down the months, days, and hours to an untimely end. Ultimately, untimely insofar as it wants it to go on, but knows it cannot. Like Christopher Hitchens once said when he had his thing of prognosis of death, that he says, I don't know what's worse, knowing that the party's going to go on, or knowing that it's got to go on, and that you've got to leave, knowing that the party will go on after me, or knowing that the party will go on and that you have to leave. For this reason, such homunculi, and I guess that's a sign of a well-lived life, right? For this reason, such homunculi are sometimes reluctant to close their eyes. Why sleep now when there is still some light? That's why I live so energetically. Why rest when there is yet living action to perform? Why die when there is still some possible time to live? A lot of us do die early, especially those who are of the not of this world sort, that say, well, they've got this life to come and they're going to put all their investment in them, so they'll just sit with the TV guide and watch TV. I mean, I know they wouldn't say it that way. I'm being cruel, I'm being mean when I say it that way, but that's how it looks to me, because I don't think you're going to get anything after that. I think you're just going to evaporate away when death is done, and what a lot of wasted time. Why die when there is still some possible time to live? This is the homunculus, the little mortal within our head, the one little life we get to live. A life and living of one, a very true and real example of going alone, but only if we recognize there is no apparent way out. Now the last section is the home of faith. One paragraph. The home of faith. The home of faith is a dark and quiet place. And I already talked about it, right? Because I talked about it being a cave, right? But it's also something else. The home of faith is a dark and quiet place. There is little sound or sunlight here, where the stone walls are as thick as a mountain, and the darkness within the cave as deep as any hole might expect to get. The way in is easy. Just decide to believe instead of pursuing doubt, and the portal will open, and you will stumble or fall some impossibly near distance into a dark depth you can hardly comprehend. It is then very hard to get out, even if you do find an exit. Once inside, it is tempting to continue retreating further until the disturbing noise of reason which sent you here becomes silent at last. Then, once you can no longer hear, you will be satisfied, though you will also really be quite alone. Alone with your confidence, which shines with only the dimmest cold light. There is no real warmth here, though there is a sort of comfort, a comfort you can get used to over time. The cold comfort of faith. This is, after all, the home of faith. Beware that. It is the same comfort of the grave. Linger here too long, and you too may become just another living, buried corpse. And that's the last of the chapter or section of the book titled The Cast. That's the entire cast. That's everybody and everywhere within Going Alone. These are the characters and places that we're going to meet and discover and learn more about as we unfold the succeeding chapters. Okay. Has it really been 83 minutes? Good Lord. Okay, let's see if there's any comments before I go. And Salyaman says, nice, Kurt, nice, hey. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me. It's been fun. I'm going to sign off for now. Let's take a look at the beach real quick. Turn the camera. There's a fisherman. Look at those waves. Those are some pounders out there. Wow. Oh, there's a guy taking off on the surf. Almost. Let's see if we can can it zoom? Oh, it does zoom. Let's see if we can get somebody riding a wave. That's a pounder for sure. That's gonna slam. Bam. Big waves. There's a big one. Wow, nobody's getting any of these. Oh, that guy just got pounded over there. Oh, there's a guy. There's some more guys. Oh, there he goes. Go. No. These are some nice looking waves. Look at that smile on his face. Look at that smile. Living well. Living well takes effort, doesn't it? Oh, look at that wave way over there. You see that guy on it? He just off the lip right there, right? There's the guy right there. Man, they call this Surf City, USA for a reason, huh? Man. Okay, now enough of that. Thank you for joining me here from Huntington Beach, California. I'll be out next Saturday doing the next chapter, whatever that is. I can't remember. Okay, take care. Remember to be safe, but not too safe, everybody. Bye-bye.